Are you ready for yet another deep indie game that doesn't really make all that much sense? Well, I got one for you, I think. Referred to as a magical realist adventure, Kentucky Route Zero TV Edition is an extremely story driven point and click game divided into 5 acts, or episodes you could say. Now, I know I called it a game, but I'm using the term game very loosely since you're placed on rails from beginning to end with pretty much no choice. So, is it a completely linear hostage situation? Well, no. Kentucky Road Zero takes a different approach to the level of interaction it grants the player. Like I said, it's very story driven, and in this case, that means a hell of a lot of dialogue to read through. And in this vast sea of dialogue that washes over the player, wave after wave, is exactly where you're giving a peculiar type of freedom. You see, during the many conversations between the characters, you will be able to choose between various responses or questions. Now, depending on your choices, you can decide how much information you want to pry loose and which specific tidbits of the story you wish to uncover. During some events, you can also choose to follow the interactions of a certain character or letting a specific character talk, which offers slightly different segments depending on your choices. But despite these varying dialogue options, the rails of the main storyline grip you tightly, and the end goal of this magical, realistic tale is always the same. Now, I've been rambling about the dialogue in the game, but what about the actual plot? The storyline, the real meat and bones of this game, so to say. Since we're talking about a very on rails game with very limited gameplay options and player input, the story pretty much has to carry this thing. Is it up to the task? Well, kinda. Maybe. I think it would really depend on the person playing the game and how much they can personally relate to the real life issues the game tries to tackle in a sometimes strange cryptic way. Some will love it, some will hate it, and some will not even know what's going on. I'm rather mixed on it. I liked some parts, found some parts boring and long winded, and didn't care about other parts. I'm not gonna go too deep into the story because, quite frankly, that would get really complicated. The storyline is a collection of bits and pieces that might not seem connected, but somehow are if you really look into it. Like I mentioned before, there is a lot of dialogue, and skimming over it is not an option if you want to have at least a clue of what's going on. In the end, the story is probably whatever you, as a player, make of it. For me, it seemed to be a commentary on society pushing people into debt, how often we live to work, just moving from paycheck to paycheck, and the idea there is no hope for the future, and yet the need of humans to band together, or something along those lines. Graphically, Kentucky Road Zero takes after its predecessors, point and click games from the early 90s gaming era, but more polished in tune with modern day standards. And I must say, outdoor locations look aesthetically stunning with a lot of creative character to them. Quite a few memorable locations to be visited in the game. It's a bit of a shame that a lot of indoor locations don't get nearly the amount of attention to detail like the outdoor locations do. Maybe this is not to derive the focus from the characters, as they might not stand out in more detailed closed environments. I don't know, just something I noticed. The characters themselves aren't exactly graphically detailed either, lacking facial features for example, but they have enough characteristics to tell them apart and allow them to manage their own style and identity. When it comes to the overall graphics, my biggest gripe was with the overworld map, which you use to move around between locations. It's extremely minimalistic and somehow despite that manages to be a bit confusing at times. I know this was a design choice, but I just think it could have been done better. The game's soundtrack is something else, featuring a combination of outlandish and sometimes even haunting electric scores mixed in with an occasional folk hymn. Its music takes Kentucky Road Zero up a notch and does boost your enjoyment while playing. Listening to the music is almost like an adventure on its own. All I've mentioned in this attempt at a review boils down into a rather surreal adventure with some stunning visual location designs, minimal gameplay, a lot of dialogue to sift through, and an amazing soundtrack. That said, it's hard to endorse this game to a general public. The huge chunks of dialogue, slow pace, and lacking gameplay will turn away many people. But those open to the experience won't regret it. Let me put it this way, if you like David Lynch's stuff, you'll probably enjoy this game. I like weirdly surrealistic games, and despite having to soldier through some parts, I'm glad I gave it a go.